Hi, thank you for that introduction. I have my camera on just briefly so you all can see my face. I know that helps sometimes when you're listening to somebody, so I'm going to shut off the video now. All right, so thanks for logging in today. We're going to be talking about treating grief and loss in children and youth. Again, she already presented my information here, so I want you to reflect for a moment as we begin about your work experience with children and youth. What are some of the situations you've encountered with your clients that involve death, grief, or loss? And what did you notice about how the client and their family handled that situation? Finally, I want you to think about what are some common challenges, concerns, or frustrations that you face when you're working with these families. So today's learning objectives hopefully will prepare you for some of those situations in the future. We're going to be talking about what is normal grief. What are some of the common signs and symptoms that grief manifests in children and youth and adults? Um, Knowing how to provide support to those folks who are grieving and giving some tools also for you to provide to parents and guardians and caregivers who are supporting a child who's grieving. It's also important for you to know where to find resources to refer families when they need professional grief counseling. And we're also going to be discussing later in the workshop about some different grief work theories. So I want to begin by talking about the difference between grief and mourning. I know a lot of times we use those words interchangeably, but grief is the normal and natural reaction to a loss. It's the feelings that are associated with the loss. And it can be many different types of loss. It could be a death, it could be, an ability, it could be your health, a relationship, a job, etc. So those are the feelings that you associate with that loss. Mourning is the outward signs, symptoms, and behaviors that go along with that grief. So that can be the process of letting go of that person or that situation. That's the way it used to be considered. Now we're getting to understand more about the difference between letting go and embracing grief, which is part of the reality that you can't just let go and move on from grief. It's learning to live with that loss. And mourning can last a lot longer than people realize. So for the purposes of this webinar, I'm just going to be using the words grief, but I'm talking about grief and mourning together. So there's different types of grief. These are three that I want to mention. The first is anticipatory grief, and that's exactly what it sounds like. It's anticipating the grief feelings you're going to have. It's when you know a loss is coming, and you're already beginning to have some of those experiences, those grief experiences before it's even happened. Normal grief is what we'll be spending most of the time talking about this morning, and complicated grief I'll mention a little bit later. So when you think about how grief is experienced, it really encompasses every single part of your life. You can experience it emotionally, physically, spiritually, cognitively, and behaviorally. So we're going to be looking at each one of those segments of grief. But before I move on, I would like to take a quick poll of what do you think is the most common feeling that people experience in grief? And Rebecca's going to pull up a poll here for us. Okay, great. Thanks for participating in that. So as you can see, everyone chose at least one of those emotions. The correct answer is actually sadness, but there are definitely people that experience some of the other emotions more prevalently. So we're going to be looking at that here on the next slide. Okay, so when you first find out about a loss, the universal experience is shock and numbness. And for some people, when that numbness is experienced, they start to wonder if something's wrong, or other people in their life wonder if something's wrong because they're not showing the sadness emotion, which is what most people expect when you find out about a loss. Not everyone shows sadness in the same way, but that shock and numbness is really a physical reaction to the loss. And I believe it's our brain psyche's way of helping us accept it a little bit at a time, because you can't just take on the loss all at once, because it would just make you implode, basically, you know. So you've got the shock of hearing the news, and then really just kind of going into a fog at the beginning of grief, because it's just too much to take on. The next most common is then sadness, which is, you know, just obviously feeling sad that the person is gone, or that the event is gone, or that the situation is over. Anger and irritability. Anger is a secondary emotion to a lot of other emotions, but anger can be directed in many different ways during grief. It can be directed at other people, family members, medical staff, people in the community. You can be angry with yourself. Some people get angry at a higher power. And so anger can sometimes look like being irritable, and sometimes it's just straight up regular old anger, but that is usually goes hand in hand with sadness. Guilt and regret is another very common emotion in grief. Some people call it the coulda, shoulda, woulda. That's when you start thinking back to what maybe could have been said, what should have been done. Maybe you're starting to question decisions that you made that caused that loss to happen. A lot of people spend a lot of time in the guilt and regret stage, honestly, because they're trying to make sense of what happened in the loss. Anxiety can be greatly exasperated whenever someone is grieving if they already had anxiety. For some people, it's a new emotion, and that can be very unnerving to people who have never been an anxious person. It can be just a light sense of insecurity, and all the way ranging up to intense panic attacks. Another big emotion is fear. For some people, it's fear of being alone, fear of getting sick, because if it happened to this person, maybe it could happen to you. Some people have a fear of dying, not being able to survive grief. It can be so overwhelming to people, they feel like they're just not going to make it. A fear of loss of control. Some people have a fear of, quote, going crazy whenever they're grieving, because it's just such intense feelings that they haven't learned how to manage yet. Loneliness is a deep sense of missing the person or the situation that's been lost. That's a very common feeling. For some, it's a lack of feeling. They just don't even care anymore. You know, they've had such an upset with the loss that they just don't even want to invest in feeling for anything else in their life. And for some, it can be relief or freedom, for someone who maybe has been a long-term caregiver and they've watched a family member suffer for a long time. Sometimes when the death happens, it's a relief, because you know that the person is not going to be suffering anymore, or maybe you've been tied down as a caregiver for a long time, and you're just kind of glad that that time in your life is over. For some people, if the person who has left or died mistreated you, that can be a feeling of relief that they're gone. It can be a relief from stress, fear, anxiety, all of those emotions. So moving into the physical reactions of grief, this can manifest in a lot of different ways for people. For some, they feel a knot in their stomach. They can feel nauseous. Some people describe a tightness in their chest, like a literal heartache, feeling short of breath, dry mouth. Their appetite changes happen. Some people are oversensitive to noise. They just want to be in a quiet place in their thoughts, and they don't want to be around a bunch of talking or music, or, you know, they don't want the TV on. Some people experience listlessness, or they just feel very weak. They don't have any energy. being very tired is a very common experience in grief. Sometimes that is because they're not sleeping well, and therefore it results in grief. I'm sorry, in fatigue. And then others, they're just very restless. They just can't sit still. They're just constantly moving because they have a lot of that anxiety energy. Some people experience spiritual crisis when they're grieving. They can feel let down. Maybe they were believing or praying for some kind of miracle to happen and it didn't happen the way they thought it should. Maybe a why me? Why did this happen to us? Some people, like I mentioned earlier, can have an anger towards a higher power, to feel like that they were let down by the universe or by God or whoever their higher power is. They may begin to withdraw. For some people, if they were very regular attenders of a religious service, they may stop going because they just feel like it's too much for them to be a part of that at this time. Others, it can go the other way. They can be more rooted into their faith. They may start to be more in prayer, getting into their spiritual books. Others, it's the opposite. They may just go away from all of that. They don't want to talk to a higher power because they're angry. Some people maybe who have never explored the spiritual side of themselves are now interested because they're wondering what happened to the person, where they are. They're thinking about afterlife, and so they may be curious and want to talk about that. Like I mentioned, reliance on faith. Some people lean into their faith when they're grieving. They try to find peace in the will of God or the universe. They believe in a greater purpose. Some people believe everything happens for a reason. And so that brings them some comfort. A desire to reconnect. Some people will go to spiritual counselors or to mediums or psychics in a way to connect with that person who's gone, or if it's a different type of loss, maybe to get a prediction of what's going to happen. They try to attempt to find that. Guilt is another part that, with the emotion of guilt, it can connect to spirituality. Maybe they feel like part of the blame is on them. If it was something that they maybe had a unreconciled relationship with the person who has left, then sometimes they can feel guilt about that. And again, a curiosity of wanting to discuss their spiritual belief with others. So the cognitive experience of grief can begin with that disbelief or that shock that we talked about earlier, just not wanting to accept that the loss has happened. Confusion, that can be a common experience of grief. And if it happens in an older adult, sometimes they will ask, the doctor or their counselor if they're starting to exhibit dementia because they're just can't remember where things are. They can't find things. They can't keep on top of their responsibilities. That's all actually a very common and normal part of grief is confusion, having a hard time following through. Hallucinations. A lot of people experience this where they think they hear the person calling their name. They think they hear them in the other room. They might hear noises when they're going to sleep at night and they think the person's walking around the house. That's actually a very common experience. Not everybody will admit to it, but it is pretty common. A preoccupation with memories. So they're wanting to relive parts of their life where they were happy, where the person was there. They want to talk about it a lot. And sometimes other people in the room or other people in the family don't want to talk about it. And so there's some conflict there when one person wants to stay in the memories in the past because it makes them feel good and the others don't want to hear about it. It can be obsessive sometimes when someone is in that beginning denial stage and they're thinking that there's something that they can do to recover the lost person or the loss. They can obsess about that. You'll see that sometimes where someone will continue to call the doctor's office or the hospital and want to ask more questions about what happened. That's part of their process. A sense of depersonalization, nothing seems real. Some people say they feel like they're floating in a bubble, or it's surreal, or it's a bad dream. They have a hard time grasping reality. And suicidal thoughts is actually a very common process in grief. And so I'll talk a little bit about that more later. But again, that's another thing that not a lot of people will admit to, but it's actually very, very common. And if you ask someone, they will probably admit to it. Behaviors of grief. Of course, crying is the most common behavior of grief. Some people are very emotive and they'll do that in front of others. Some people will hold it in until they're by themselves, but crying is certainly a behavior of grief. It's a release of tension for them. Sleep disturbances, very common. Some people have a hard time going to sleep, so they'll stay up really late watching TV or doing something to distract themselves. Others go to bed really early, but then they're waking up in the middle of the night because they went to bed too early. Some people just wake up every night at 2 a.m. and they're up for several hours. They can have nightmares, they can have dreams about the loss. Appetite disturbances is very common. Some people overeat in grief and they gain weight. Other people don't eat enough and lose weight. So it's pretty common to see weight changes during grief. Poor concentration, that goes along with that cognitive that we talked about, being absent-minded, having a hard time getting things done. I call it the multitasking griever. You go into one room and you start a project and then you think, oh, I forgot, I got to take care of this and I got to take care of that. And they're just walking around the house all day doing half projects and never really getting anything done. Again, confusion, having a hard time because your mind is wandering to the loss. I know some people who were very avid readers that find that they can't even, finish a book. They can't even read a magazine. Their mind just won't stay focused. Social withdrawal can be very common in grief. They want to be alone. They lose interest in the outside world. In the beginning, a lot of people will show up with food and with, visits, and they want to provide a lot of support, but then that starts to wane a little bit and the invitations don't come in as often. And so the griever doesn't reach out because they don't want to be a downer, and so they just withdraw and they end up staying home alone. And that also contributes to some depression. And attachment, that can look like visiting places where you had good memories, carrying around treasured objects that remind you of the person who has passed away. Other behaviors is restlessness, not being able to sit still, being fidgety, pacing, like I mentioned earlier, multitasking without completing the task. Avoidance, some people will drive the long way around town so they don't have to go past where the car accident was or where the hospital is or where their favorite restaurant was. They might just no longer go to those places anymore because it's too painful. For some people, it's a searching. They're looking for, they're pining for the person who's been lost. Assimilation, that's assuming mannerisms and traits of the loved one. I know sometimes with children, they will suddenly be very interested in the hobbies of the person who has passed, or they will start to talk like them, or they will pick up, some of their mannerisms to be like the person who's gone. Reminiscing is just actually a very healthy behavior there. That's where you're reliving some memories, talking together, sharing stories. That's actually something that's very helpful to people in grief. And silence is when people just refuse to talk about their loss. They refuse to talk about the person, and they just shut down, really. So let's talk a little bit here. Please use the chat function now to talk about your own ways that you've coped with loss. If any of this that I've talked about so far sounds familiar, or if there's been someone in your life who's been grieving and you noticed some of these traits. Um, what did you do? How about with your clients? What did you notice with them? Basically, what would probably come up in the chat is that a lot of you have experienced what we've just talked about, because these are all um, different facets of your life that is affected by grief, and it's universal. Everyone has had grief in their life. Everyone can relate to this. It's one of the hardest things that people have to learn to manage in their life. Depending on how close the person was to you, it can absolutely change who you are forever. And so, because of that, it manifests in all those different facets of our life. Um, Knowing that helps us when we're working with children and youth who are also experiencing a loss, because we can certainly empathize with them. Um, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So I'll go ahead and move on. Children experience many different types of losses. And one of the exercises I used to do in a training for volunteers with hospice was to create a timeline of loss. And so we started as far back as people could remember their very first loss and all the way up to the present. And I encourage everybody to do this exercise on your own, because you'll actually be shocked at how many losses you have managed in your lifetime. And what's interesting when we do a group discussion after completing this exercise is how early the loss began really impacts how people cope with it later in life. And so when you think about children having losses, some children make it, all the way to age 10, 12, 14 before they have any kind of death in the family, or loss of a pet or anything like that. Others, it's just a lot. They have a lot of losses in their lives starting very young. And so when you look at, of course, death is a huge loss for people. Death of family members, friends, neighbors, loss of friendship, that can have a significant impact on children. Divorce of their parents, having to move can be a loss, because they're losing a sense of safety, of familiarity. They have to start over in a new school, perhaps. When a parent loses their job, that certainly has a ripple effect of stress on a child because of the financial repercussions of that. The incarceration of a loved one, that's a different kind of loss, because there comes, some stigma with that. And so maybe even though the child is grieving, maybe they feel like they can't discuss that, with others, because perhaps the family has said, don't talk about it. It's an embarrassment or something shameful. Changing schools can be a loss for children. Natural disasters, certainly, in the South, we deal with hurricanes, and sometimes that's a loss of your whole home and all your possessions. There's fires, there's all kinds of disasters that can happen. The birth of a sibling can actually be a loss for children, because they've lost their role in the family, depending on the birth order. So that can be something that has a ripple effect of grief. Breakups, certainly breakups of their parents' relationships, but also children themselves experience breakups, as they get to be teenagers. Loss of health or ability. Children deal with that for themselves and with adults in their lives. And military deployments, so if a parent or a family member is deployed, that can be a sense of loss too, and a lot of stress and anxiety for children with that. So children's understanding of death and loss looks different according to what age they are. So when you think about an infant, they that somebody is not around that they're familiar with, but they don't really understand the difference between temporary and permanent. That's part of a developmental stage of an infant. They used to say you could be in front of an infant and then hide yourself under a blanket, and they don't understand that you're still there. Their brain hasn't quite comprehended that, like, oh, peekaboo, here I am. It's a big surprise. So For infants, if somebody significant in their life passes away, they might not realize that that's forever. So therefore, grief may surface later in life when they have a better understanding of that. Preschool and kindergarten age children, so ages 3 to 5, they may also still think of the loss as temporary. So I know sometimes parents would come to me and say, I'm concerned about my child because he went to the funeral and now he's asking where grandma is, and it just really blew their mind. And that's because they have a hard time understanding permanent loss at that age. So they may think it's temporary. They may think the person will return. So they might even say something about that. They also connect events, depending on how the adults in their life respond to that. Like, oh, well, grandma went to sleep. And so that's confusing to children because they think, well, when's she going to wake up? Or grandma's sick, rather than telling them that she died, and so they have a hard time understanding that. They also start to connect those events then. Okay, if I go to sleep, am I going to wake up? If I get sick, am I going to die too? So they have a hard time putting those pieces together. They may be more comfort seeking with caregivers, so they might want to be held more. They might get up in the middle of the night and want to come into bed with their adult caregiver. So that is pretty common for that age group. So elementary school age children, ages 6 to 10, they have a better understanding of the finality of death or loss. However, a lot of them don't have the coping skills developed yet, so they have a hard time with those behaviors that we talked about earlier and the emotions of grief. Denial can be a primary defense for this age. So sometimes the adults in their life will keep mentioning, they're not coming back, dad passed away, there was an accident, whatever. And they may say, yeah, I don't believe it, he's coming back. So that is common. They can sometimes see death as something that takes you. So there can be a lot of fear that starts at that age with maybe if they get sick, maybe, when it gets dark outside, suddenly they're more afraid of just an unknown that's going to come and take you. They have a need to understand the difference between terminal illness and just being sick. So middle school is ages 11 to 13. They understand the finality of death and they start to understand the universality of death. So they understand everybody dies, we're all going to die at some point. And so they might be a little bit more in tune to their own mortality at that point, particularly with the school shootings that are being, so prevalent and on the news. Middle school age kids are a little bit more aware of that. And so they start to understand that that could happen to anybody at any age. They may start to question the biology of death. So, someone might say, well, grandma died. Well, how? What happened? They want to know the cause of death and they want to understand what happened. The tendency to not want to express emotions. So this is particular to this age group, ages 11 to 13. That's, if you remember middle school, that's whenever you want to be as, I guess, conformed to others as possible. You don't want anything that makes you different. You don't want any attention brought to you. And so therefore, they're not going to cry. They're not going to look weak. They don't want to look like they need people, so that tends to happen more with this age group. Not all of them, but a lot of them. There's also a sense of helplessness and lack of control that begins at this age. So high school ages 14 to 18, certainly they understand the finality of death and loss. They are beginning to develop some coping skills though at this point. They're a little bit more aware of how to have emotional regulation. They know how to seek support. Their life stage is shifting from dependence to independence, and so they may be resistant to someone coming and wanting to coddle them, so to speak, in their grief. They may say, "I'm fine, you know, you don't need to do that for me." Um, Sometimes they tend to feel helpless and scared about what the loss means in regard to their security. So if it's a job loss, they're more aware of the finances. You know, if someone leaves the relationship, well, what's going to happen? Are we going to be able to stay here? Are we going to have to move? Are we going to have to change schools? You know, those things start to surface. They don't necessarily show a yearning for the person who's gone to other people. They might feel it, they might experience it, but they want to do that in the privacy of their own thoughts and experiences. They start to be concerned about what's going to be expected of them now. So, you know, if a caregiver in the home is gone, then it's like, oh, great, now it comes to me. I'm going to have to be the one to take care of my younger siblings, or I'm going to have to cook or clean or do something that I didn't have to do before. So they need a lot of support and understanding at this age, and all ages actually. But so the grief reactions also vary differently based on age. So children ages 4 to 5, they escape into play. They can attach to substitute people. So you might find, like, if a child has lost a female caregiver, they tend to gravitate towards another female adult to kind of meet that need. They give up attachment to the deceased. Some of them can idealize the deceased, you know, like, my mom was the greatest. Nobody's better than my mom, you know, she was perfect, and kind of put them on a pedestal. Um, they obviously experience sadness, longing, and yearning. They may ask for the person over and over and over. They can become compulsive. You might see them have a bewilderment. Regression is common too. Maybe if they, you know, start to wet the bed again, or they start to, you know, suck their thumb again, or they want their blankie. Those are all very common grief reactions for this age group. For some of them, they get to more aggressive. They start to have more tantrums. They have more rage about things that maybe they didn't used to experience that before. Nightmares are common with this age, and some of them can be a little bit hyperactive or nervous. That's their anxiety that's manifesting as hyperactivity. Ages 6 to 10, that's when the magical thinking starts for children. So if I am really good, my mom's coming back. If I, you know, clean my room, I'm going, you know, my dad will come back home. You know, like, they just start to think that there's something that they can do that's going to make the loss reverse. You know, they might start making wishes on stars, or, you know, just a lot of different things that they're going to try to do. They fantasize that the deceased is still alive. Some of them may even talk like that's still the case. So that's normal. They have a greater fear of death than they used to. There can be a fear of objects, person, or events related to the death. So if someone passed away in a car accident, they're afraid to get in the car. They don't want to go for a ride. They, you know, they don't want to go to the doctor's office because grandma passed away at the doctor's office, you know, so that kind of thing. They can take on the traits of the person. I mentioned that earlier. Maybe suddenly, if dad was a big football fan, they want to watch football, they want to wear a football jersey, they want to carry a football around. You know, that's pretty common for them to want to take on the traits of the person who's gone. A new fear of abandonment. Maybe when they're getting dropped off for school, they cry, or they won't get out of the car because they're afraid of leaving, you know, the caregiver. Maybe they're afraid something's going to happen to their other parent. Again, with the regression, that can happen with this age, where they start to talk like a baby, or they can, you know, want to be held all the time. Bedwetting is common. Again, the aggressiveness and irritability. They can also have nightmares and dreams about the loss, and hyperactivity and nervousness as well. Ages 11 to 13, they're realizing their own mortality. They also have a sense of being invincible. So there may be more danger-seeking behaviors in this age group. Sometimes you might see them out like trying to play chicken in the street, or they might try, sports that have a chance of getting injured. That's all new behavior for them. They can have delayed grief reactions. So sometimes a loss maybe happened when they were younger and it starts to come out around ages 11 to 13, or this group may delay their reaction until high school. So that can be their way of trying to gain a sense of control. They're more irritable, so the anger of grief comes out as irritability in that age group. They're reluctant to discuss their emotions. So if you ask them how they're doing, they might say, I'm fine, I want to talk about it. Or they might just be quiet and not even answer you. This age group tends to have somatic symptoms. So even though they're feeling the emotions of grief, they might tell you they have a headache, a stomach ache, just phantom pains in their body that really, if you take them to the doctor, there's nothing wrong with them, so that's their grief. Ages 14 to 18, again, that sense of invincibility, a denial of emotions. They suppress their thoughts. You will see more depression in this age group because they tend to have a greater understanding of the significance of the loss. And so that can really make them feel defeated. And the somatic symptoms also in this age group, they have a bigger need to talk about the death. So while the 11 to 13 don't want to talk about the death, the 14 to 18 do want to talk about it. Physically and behaviorally, again, they might regress in their developmental milestones. Sleeping and eating problems can happen. So for some, they don't sleep well, they're up and down all night long. Many of them tend to go towards overeat rather than not eating. So they're craving the sugar and the carbs and the feel-good foods, and just trying to fill that need, that void in their life, and they use food for that. So some kids cry easily, some not at all. Both of those are normal. They have a hard time tolerating intense feelings. So when they're feeling anxiety, they might not recognize that that's what it is. And so they get irritable, they can get angry. Some of them cry when they're feeling anxious. They might suddenly be more socially withdrawn. They want to be in their room, they want to be on their screens, they don't want to talk to anybody, they got their headphones on. More so than normal. I know that's common. You might see academic problems happening where their grades start to slip. They start to be more support seeking outside of the family. So this is particular for the ages 11 plus. They tend to be, texting and making videos, and they want to be with their friends and they want to hear from their friends. And for some of them, it's a way to get attention too, that when they're in pain and they're hurting, they want attention from other people to feel better. Adolescents in particular should be monitored for suicidal ideation. So I would say don't be afraid to ask about that. And I would certainly have a safety plan in place, make sure that they don't have access to lethal measures in the house, particularly during months 3 to 6 after the loss. That tends to be when things ramp up after that shock wears off. So keep that on your radar. Common adolescent grief reactions. It feels like no one understands how they're feeling. They can focus on their past negative behaviors. So they start to, again, that coulda, shoulda, woulda, like, oh, why didn't I help my mom more? Why wasn't I, why was I always too busy to go to grandma's house? They start to think about things that they could have done better, to make the person proud of them. They can be anxious about their own health. Suddenly you've got, and this tends to be more for the girls for some reason, but they start to be more hypochondriac when they're grieving. So every little thing that they think is wrong, they think is a terminal condition. So that's pretty common. They long to feel normal again. So they're very aware when others are treating them differently. Sometimes they behave like they've already adapted to the loss. And so I do have parents sometimes that will say they seem fine. So that worries me. Why aren't they crying? Their mom died. And that's actually a coping mechanism that they're using to try to pretend that everything is normal. They may choose to avoid talking about their feelings. So this is all common adolescent grief reactions. Common thoughts shared by adolescents, the survivor guilt. It should have been me. I should have been the one to die, or I should have been the one to have this terrible thing happen to me. Magical thinking, if I had only done this, this wouldn't have happened. If I had behaved better, you wouldn't have gotten divorced. If I had, not been selfish, then this person wouldn't have died. They start thinking magically. Regrets. I wish we didn't have that big fight that morning before the car accident. They really get focused on that. I never told them how much they meant to me. And then again, that relief. She was suffering for so long, but I feel guilty that I'm relieved. Or he was abusive to me. Why should I feel sad? I'm relieved. I'm glad he's gone. I've had clients before where it was an abusive domestic violence situation, and the man passed away, and the mother and the daughter were like, we're glad, we're relieved he's out of here. That was a horrible life, so they can feel relieved, but again, they can also feel a little guilty about that too. So when you're working with grieving parents and guardians, we have to think back to, again, that timeline that I talked about where everybody has had losses over a long period of time. Maybe they never had an example of what healthy grief looks like. So because of that, that affects how they treat their own children and youth, and the expectations they have. So if their coping skill was to just move on, everything's fine, toughen up, that's life, then they're going to expect that of their kids. Maybe marital or relationship problems start to happen during grief, which can be then again contributing to some anxiety and fear and worry for their children because suddenly mom and dad are arguing. And part of that can be because men and women process grief differently. Men tend to be, and I'm sorry, this is stereotypes, but it's just been my experience, problem solving. And so they may see loss as there's nothing we can do about that. Let's move on. And meanwhile, the wife might feel like, no, I want to talk about this and I want to, swim in this for a while. And I really want to feel sad. And so because of that, there can be some dynamics there where the marriage relationship gets tense because of it, particularly if they lost a child. That there's a reason why there's a high divorce rate whenever people lose a child, and that's because of that relationship tension when the two people are grieving differently. Parents can have mixed feelings or conflicting views about how to express their grief around their children. So sometimes one person is very emotive and they're crying, and others say, don't do that in front of the kids, that scares them, hold it together. And so that can give mixed messages to the kids too. Like, well, mom seems fine that, that grandma died. I don't know how I feel about that, So being able to express your grief feelings in front of children is actually healthy. Parents may not agree on what information should be shared with the children. Now, I've seen this happen a lot with suicide. They don't want the kids to know that's how the person passed away. And so I always say, as a professional, that's a family decision, but maybe giving them a lot of support in coming to a consensus on what they're going to do about what they share with the kids. Changing in parenting style may occur. I've seen this happen where maybe they were authoritative parent style to begin with, and after a loss, they become very permissive. That loss of structure is actually detrimental to children, but they think they're being nice. Like, oh, sure, kids, we can have ice cream for dinner. Let's go to the movies. You don't have to do your homework. Bedtime's just whatever. And that actually has a domino effect of negativity, but at the time, the parents think that they're going easy on the kid because everybody's grieving. So, so that can occur. Conflict increases in the family. There's a lot of dynamics around grief and loss. Financial, physical, maybe if a grandparent passed away, the spouse moves in with your family. So there's a lot of things that can change in the lifestyle of the family, and that can increase a lot of conflict. Playing the blame game, well, we were late, and because of that, so and so got into a car accident, or this, if you hadn't acted like this person wouldn't have left. Sometimes the loss can bring the family closer together, though. There can be positives that come through grief. Maybe a realization of the preciousness of life can occur, and so sometimes the family is even better after a loss. Parents and caregivers often feel helpless. So that's probably like the number one thing that I focus on when I'm first meeting with parents and caregivers, is to recognize and validate that they feel helpless. This is something that happened out of their control, and you want to name that and say, I know you're feeling out of control right now. Yes, I am. Like that really helps them to feel like it's okay to admit that. They can be confused about what to say or what not to say. I don't know how to help my kid. They're just all over the place. I'm all over the place. I'm dealing with my own grief. I don't know how to help them. Trying to find the balance between protecting their child and being honest with their child. I want them to know. I don't want them to know. They can know this much information. I hope they don't find out this other information. Unsure how to express their own grief. And focusing on the physical loss instead of the intangible loss. So they may focus on the person being gone and not focus on the fact that now the child feels insecure or doesn't feel safe or feels like they can't trust things. So reminding parents and caregivers, there's a lot of different aspects to grief, and being able to recognize and talk about all those with their kids. When you're working with grieving children and youth, as we've discussed, there are a lot of different dynamics. There's a lot of different ways that children show grief. So the first thing, and I think the most important thing you can do as a professional, is provide education to both the children and youth and their parent or guardian about what is normal. I think a lot of the times when someone is concerned about a griever and they start to describe what the person is behaving like, and they find out that's normal, it's like, oh, well, okay, then I guess it's not a problem. That was probably the thing that I noticed in grief counseling, was going through those characteristics that I just talked about when I started explaining to people, hey, it's normal that you're confused, or that you can't get anything done, or you can't sleep, or you're not eating well. Oh, really? Okay, I'm not crazy. Oh, good. That makes me feel so much better. And that is part of why the research shows us that support groups, grief support groups, is one of the most effective modalities for grievers, because when they start talking to other people and finding out that what they're experiencing is the same, it immediately makes them feel better. It's kind of that misery loves company mentality, but it's just, hey, we're all in this together. We're all experiencing these feelings and these behaviors. So providing education about what is normal. Providing emotional support and validation. That's a big part. You're doing the best you can, Mom. This is really hard. This totally rocked your world. Good for you for getting up every day and taking care of your kids. Just providing that support makes a big difference. And then knowing where the resources are in your community to provide to families. I'm going to give you a list of those in a little bit, but being able to provide something to them that they can follow up with, either if they need professional help or if they just need some information to use at home, and some activities or exercises to do with their kids. So how can you support families? The first thing is just being present. Being available makes a big difference to people when they're hurting, knowing that they can go to somebody that's going to help them. Listen and reflect back. So this is a tricky one for a lot of people when, like I mentioned earlier, we've all grieved. It's a universal experience. And when you have found something that works for you, you want to give advice and tell people, oh, well, this is what I did. A lot of times grievers don't want to hear about you. And so we usually had to remind a lot of our volunteers in hospice about that. Like a lot of people that volunteered had had a loss even through the program. And so they would immediately want to launch into their story and the families didn't want to hear it. They've got enough of their own emotions right now. They don't want to take on yours. And so just listening and reflecting back what they've just said to you is so validating. Like I'm really having a hard time. I hear you. You're having a hard time. Yes, I am. I can't sleep and I'm not eating and da da da. You know, you're having a hard time sleeping? Yes. You just reflect back exactly what they've said. Provide encouragement. You can do this. You're going to get through this. Help them engage in life review. That's actually one of the things that makes people feel better is to be able to talk about the good times. So giving them a chance to, just asking simple questions like, oh, what is something you really miss about your mom? What's something that she used to do that made you feel good, or that you tell me a memory that made everybody laugh in your family, or what's a family joke about grandpa, helping them talk through helps them feel better. Kids love life review. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. Validate that this is the most intense pain they may have ever experienced. Again, there's a lot of different stress and emotions that we have in life and a lot of problems that we have in life, but grief is the one thing that we can't avoid and that we can't prevent from happening. Death happens regardless. So everybody is going to have that intense pain. There's no solution to that because you can't bring the person back. So validating that this is painful helps people. Again, normalizing those common grief reaction, letting them know the resources available to them, and being present, just being present. I said that twice because it's important. All right, a lot of times parents will say, how do we tell the children? Sometimes that'll happen when you're working with a family and the child doesn't know about the loss yet. Either, well, we just found out dad's going to jail, or, grandma has got cancer and it's not curable. How are we going to explain this to the kids? So the first thing is being honest. Children are a lot more perceptive than we realize. They listen, they take in things that we don't know. So being honest is the best thing. They don't have to give all the details, but they do need to be honest. Be patient with children because they are going to react in many different ways based on the type of coping that they already have. Some children cope with very heavy things very well, and others, something small can really just rock their world. So be patient. They will know their children best. Express feelings openly. I encourage parents to tell their kids, mom's having a hard time. This is really a difficult time. We're going to get through this, but I'm hurting too. Or, I didn't sleep well last night. Have patience with me, Maintaining structure. I talked about that earlier with the difference in parenting style. If they had a certain structure in their household, they need to keep that same structure. That's going to help the child feel secure and safe and to trust that their needs are still going to be met, and reassure them everything's going to be okay. You're going to be taken care of. What can we do to help the children? Talk about their guilty feelings. A lot of children take on this, it's because of something I did, this behavior complex, so, and part of that is because that's how we talk to kids, like, I'm stressed out because you didn't put your shoes on to get in the car, like it's your fault. And we don't even mean to do that, but it's just something that happens. So addressing the guilty feelings, this didn't happen because of you. Nothing you did is why this is happening, reminding them of that. The use of play. A lot of times kids don't have the words to explain how they're feeling, but it will come out in their behaviors. and it will come out in their play. So I'm a big fan of play therapy. Obviously, not everybody has the training in that, but just teaching the parents to just get on the floor and play with your kids. And that can help them work out some of those emotions. Reassuring them that they can't catch the illness. You know, if it's cancer or, you know, whatever it is that the person passed away from, helping the child know, like, you know, it's not contagious, you're not going to get that. Avoiding terms such as they went away or they left us or they went to sleep. Those are confusing terms, especially to kids under 10, because they take everything literal. So you just want to avoid giving any kind of message that sounds like the person chose to do this and that there's a reversal. You know, you don't want them to think that that's possible. The use of rituals can help children. Any kind of, you know, every night we're gonna say goodnight to grandma, we're gonna, you know, blow her a kiss, or we're gonna light a candle, or, you know, whatever kind of thing that the family feels comfortable doing. Those things can help kids with coping. These are ideas of therapeutic activities for grievers. So journaling is a big one. It's funny because I would always suggest that to people. And yeah, I'm not really a journaler. I don't think I'll do that. And then they would come back like 2 weeks later and they're like, I wrote 15 pages in this notebook. You know, it's funny how some people just really like doing that. And not everybody does, but I sometimes will tell people, just jot down a couple lines or draw a picture at the end of the day of, you know, how you felt today or, you know, what you experienced. Part of why the journal is so effective is because they can look back after weeks or months and say, oh, look where I was then and look how much better I am now. And it's really therapeutic to people. So kids can keep journals, you know, especially if you assure them that what they write in there is private, and make sure that the parents know that it should be kept private, you know, not something they're going to read when the kid goes to school. You know, let it be a place for them to vent their feelings. A memory box or scrapbook. Kids love that. You know, let's pull together some pictures. Let's draw something. Let's, you know, put in a special gift or a card that we have from the person. Let's print out some pictures and make a scrapbook and write down some memories of, you know, holidays or vacations or trips we took. All of that can be very therapeutic for children. Lighting a candle, you know, whether that be every night or on special occasions. I know sometimes at holiday time, people will set a place, an empty plate at the table to represent the person that's no longer there, and light a candle. Planting flowers or a tree in the person's honor, that can be great. Kids love to take care of that. They'll go out and water it and, you know, just put fertilizer on it or whatever, you know, just somehow they're caretaking for this memorial for their loss. Writing a letter, that can actually be a really good tool, especially if the person has some unresolved either conflict or something that they wish they got to say to the person. That's a great way to do it. Have them write the letter. They can either burn it when they're done, they could keep it, they can, you know, tear it up, whatever they want to do, but just the act of writing out the letter is very therapeutic. Sharing stories, going through photo albums, again, that's that life review that's so important, especially for the younger kids that maybe don't have as good of a memory or as long of a memory of the person. It's a great way for them to hear things that maybe they didn't remember or didn't know about the person. Playing music. So I will say that most grievers in the first few months have a hard time with music. It's very triggering for them because music is usually paired with wonderful memories, you know. And so that can be a little bit too intense for people, but eventually playing special music can be very wonderful for people. I always tell people if music is something that's therapeutic to you, but you find it's painful, like, oh, that was our song, or he loved to listen to rock, or, you know, this was something we danced to. Pick a different type of music, you know, but just still have some music in the background. That can be helpful. Creating a scholarship can be something that's nice, that is a way to memorialize the person. I know a friend of mine passed away, and we do a fun run for her every year, and the money goes to her favorite charity. So just something you can do annually sometimes is a nice way to remember the person. Giving to charity in their honor. Sometimes nowadays when people have obituaries, sometimes they'll say, oh, in lieu of flowers, send money to the Red Cross or the Humane Society or something. So giving in honor of that person. Art therapy can be great for kids. Sometimes, again, something that you can put with a scrapbook or something that they can just paint, paint your feelings, draw, sculpt. They love to play in clay or Play-Doh. That can be very therapeutic to kids. Volunteering can be a way to, get the family out, let them be serving other people. That tends to help them take their mind off of the pain that they're experiencing when they can be around other people and do something nice for them. Have a special meal that can be on the person's special day, like a birthday or anniversary, or it could just be, hey, let's all get together and go to Applebee's and laugh and talk about this person. Make a memorial visit. For some people, that's cemetery or mausoleum. Other people, it's, let's all go to the beach because grandma loved the beach, or, mom's hometown. Let's go look at all her old favorite spots to be. Having a celebration of life. There's a lot of people that are moving towards this. The funeral used to be, within 3 days, let's have a funeral. More people are doing cremation now, and they're having a celebration of life at a later time when people can travel and be together. So that's something that can be very good for children and youth if they can be a part of planning that celebration. What do you think we should have? What kind of food? What kind of music? Where, what do you think that we should do to make this special? A grief garden, that's similar to the planting of the flowers, the trees. You can have them, have a little something that they can just cater to and tend to every day that helps them have a ritual that they can do every day to help them relax, and hosting a memorial event. So these are all great activities. This is something that's from the Dougy Center. If you're not familiar with it, that is a grief center out in Colorado. They have done a lot of research on grieving children and youth. And so I'm going to provide their website in a little bit, but they have a ton of resources that you can use, print off, and give to families. But one of them is this Grieving Teens Bill of Rights. And the teenagers love this. I would print it out and give it to them. No, they have the right to know the truth about how the person died. This gives them that sense of, just reality and also truth, that is so important to that age group. Like, hey, I want to know what happened, and I want to know the details. Don't try to protect me. I have the right to know. The right to have their answers, their honest answers to their questions. The right to visit the person who died or the place where they died. That is very important to teenagers. They don't want to be protected from that. The right to be involved in planning that memorial service, to not talk about their feelings, to grieve in a way that's not censored, a right to their own unique feelings and thoughts. It doesn't have to be what they should be feeling or thinking. They can have whatever thoughts and feelings that they want. And the right to express their own philosophical views about life and death. So that is another thing that I have noticed with professionals is a lot of times in the attempt to make people feel better, we're sharing, our philosophies on life and death, and that might not be where the child or the youth is, in their own belief system or thought process. And so to tell them like, oh, your dad's in a better place now. Why, how do you know, is what the kid's going to say. Or what's better than being here with me, so they don't want to hear that. So the right to express their own, just ask them, where do you think they are right now? How, let them have a chance to talk about it in their own way. These are warning signs that individuals are not coping well. So when they're expressing a lot of feelings about hopelessness and worthlessness and helplessness, that should get your red flags up, okay? When they make statements like, I wish I was never born, I wish I was dead, that's whenever you want to explore that further. So you want to make sure you inform parents to be watching for this, okay? When the teens start to skip school, their grades are starting to slip. That's giving you those warning signs of, apathy. I don't care. I don't care about my future. I don't care about the ripple effect of what I'm doing right now. The griever who starts to give away personal or sentimental items. And so we all know, that's a warning sign when people start to give away things that are important to them. When they're sleeping or eating much more than usual. So teens already eat and sleep a lot, we know, but when it's way more like, sleeping the entire weekend long, that's a warning sign of depression. So when they're not maintaining personal hygiene, they just stop showering, they stop combing their hair, they don't brush their teeth, they don't change clothes, they wear the same thing every day, 4 days in a row. These are warning signs. Complaining of physical illness all the time. Now, I mentioned earlier somatic complaints is common, but whenever they're, every day, going to the nurse's school, oh, I'm sick, I need to go home. I'm sick, I need to go home. That's a warning sign. They're not coping well. When they start driving recklessly, they start abusing substances, or they're getting into other risky behaviors. These are all warning signs that they are not coping well. So here are some resources that you can provide to families. First of all, there's many private mental health providers out there that are available to families. You can Google a list of, mental health counseling, grief counseling. You can look it up by licensed clinical social worker, marriage and family therapy, mental health counselors. There's a lot of different providers out there, not even necessarily private practice, but also community mental health providers that are available. Some of them take insurance. Some of them have a very liberal sliding scale fee for families. So that is a great resource for people when you've got someone who's beyond the normal grief reaction, when the child is starting to have some of those warning signs, or you just feel like they're not coping well. They can't get through the day. They can't stay in class. They're just not doing well. They probably need to see a professional. Hospice providers, for the most part, they offer free grief counseling to the community. And they certainly serve those who are on their program. That is actually a requirement. For 13 months after the patient passes away, they are to provide bereavement counseling to the family, but a lot of them also provide it to the community as a service. So you can refer them to the local hospice to find out what kind of programs they have. Some of them have them specific to children. They have like grief camps that they'll do on the weekends where, every kid that's lost a parent gets to go to this camp for free, and they have canoeing and activities and s'mores and all that fun stuff. But it's just a nice way for kids to go and feel, quote, normal, with other kids who understand what they're going through. So that is a wonderful resource for them. They have found, like I said earlier, the research shows that grief groups are very effective for children and youth. And part of that is just that need to be around other people that understand. So a lot of them will have a grief group specific to the age. They'll do art projects, they'll do memory books, they'll just talk about, hey, this is normal grief. How are you feeling? How are you coping? So those are all available. For the most part, they're free. There's also if you go to www.grief.com, they have a list of support groups. You can search by your zip code, and it'll show you what's available in your area. Many churches and temples in town have grief groups as well. Talk to the school counselor. A lot of them have grief groups in the school as well. They'll pull the kids out for 30 minutes and let them talk together. They can also pull the kid out one-to-one if they're having a hard time coping. Some kids love that. Some kids don't. They already feel different. They don't want to be, any kind of attention, like, oh, here comes the counselor to take Susie out, So some of them don't like that. So, you want to check with the kid first and see if that's something they're interested in. But You can have the counselor just be aware, that the child has had a loss and, to check on them from time to time. Again, grief support groups, look for those. You can actually Google grief support group in your city and they'll come up with lots of different choices there. There are grief retreats as well as camps available for kids and youth. And that www.dougy.org, that's that Dougy Center I mentioned. They are one of the national examples of great grief resources for children. So they have wonderful programs. They have camps as well. But again, they have a lot of things you can print off of their website to provide to families as well. There's also Sesame Street has some videos that some DVDs and probably it's on YouTube now, but there's like Bert and Ernie talk about a loss, and they have it in English and in Spanish. So that's kind of a nice thing for the pre-K kids to kind of talk about death and what that is. There's coloring books. There's tons of books on Amazon for children specific to grief. So a lot of school libraries have those as well, and public libraries too. So you can point parents in that direction to look for some grief books for kids as well. Okay, so we're going to switch directions here and talk a little bit about some different grief theories, and that can be helpful to understand and know when you're working with grieving families. So the first one is something that probably a lot of you have heard about, which is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She was a nurse who worked in a hospital who noticed there was a pattern to patients who had been told they had a terminal diagnosis. She noticed an emotional and behavioral process that they went through. And so she wrote a book about the 5 stages of dying. And actually that has since been kind of changed to the 5 stages of grieving as well. So her stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And so if anybody's ever taken a psychology class or, any kind of counseling class, you've probably reviewed this before. But the first stage, denial, that's that initial shock that we talked about earlier, just that feeling of numbness. You can't believe what you've just heard. You don't want to believe what you've just heard. So a lot of people remain in that denial stage for a while. Some people that can take up to 3 months. Others it's a few weeks, So, but that feeling numb, a lot of times when a child or a youth or an adult is in that stage, they feel bad that they don't feel bad, if that makes sense. So explaining to them that that's normal and that they are in the initial stage of grief, the shock stage, helps them. I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, you're in denial, because people get defensive about that word, but just explaining, this is something that your mind and your body is doing right now to protect you from the pain of grief. So a lot of times when people are in this stage, they just live minute by minute. That's as much as they can do. They avoid feeling the weight of the loss, so they're just trying to run from it, really. And this helps us survive the beginning stages of loss or grief. So the next stage is anger. That's when the numbness is wearing off and you're starting to get upset about why this happened. You're mad. You're mad at the world. You're mad at yourself. You're mad at the universe. And it's a necessary stage of the healing process to get to anger. It's funny because I would meet with people, someone say, oh, I'm not angry at all, and then later as they're talking, they're like getting very animated and, irritable. And I was like, this is anger right here. They don't even recognize it sometimes, but they have to be willing to feel that anger. This isn't fair. I'm upset about the injustice that this happened to us and our family. We're good people. Why did this happen? Now I'm struggling. Sometimes they're mad at the person that died. They left me this big mess. I have to deal with all this, insurance and bills and phone calls and canceling subscriptions. And it's a lot of work to manage the estate of someone. It's a 40-hour a week job right there. So people can get angry about it. The more you feel it, the more you heal it. That's a quote from another grief theory, but basically the thought process is people have to move through the anger stage to get through grief. So again, it's a secondary emotion to other feelings such as sadness, disappointment, and fear. It can stem from feeling deserted or abandoned by the person. And anger can actually be a strength sometimes. That can kind of help propel people to get things done whenever they're in the anger stage. So it's not necessarily a negative thing, but it is one of the big stages of moving through grief. So the third stage is bargaining. That's when you're just wishing for life to be different. You're wishing to hit that reverse button and go back in time before all this pain came to your life. So some people ask a higher power for it to go back to what it was. You know, let me wake up and this was just a bad dream and life is not like it is now. When people are in this stage, they promise good behavior in exchange for something, you know, and sometimes this stage happens when, you know, before the loss has happened. That's part of that anticipatory grief. The bargaining stage is pretty common for people when they're about to face something really painful, like, oh, you know, please, we will do this and this and this if you just make this happen or change this outcome. Offering to donate to charity, giving your time to a worthy cause. I promise I'll be healthy. I'll exercise every day, you know, like whatever it is that you think you need to promise to get what you want. People in the bargaining stage are desperate for a different outcome. You know, I had a man who was in such liver failure. He probably only had a few days left to live, and he, you know, his skin was dark yellow, and he just was very, very ill. He had been an alcoholic, and he was not a liver transplant candidate because of not being able to go without alcohol. Like they have to prove a time of sobriety to be a liver transplant recipient. And, you know, his mother came to me and was like, oh, please, please, you know, we'll mortgage our house. You know, what can we do to pay, you know, for a liver? You know, she was in that bargaining stage. She was just desperate for a different outcome, you know, for her child. So you focus on the if only and what ifs, you know, desperate for life to return to what it was before the loss, trying to make sense of things, looking for fault, you know. This is all part of that bargaining stage. Stage 4 is depression. So that's whenever the grief has really hit people. I always say it's pretty standard between the months of 3 and 6 for people to be in the depression stage. That's when the grief is very intense. They cry more during that time than in the beginning, and that scares people. That's usually when they come for professional counseling, is around that time period, because it's like, why am I getting worse? I should be feeling better. It's been this much time. It's actually because that denial, shock, you know, all that has worn off. And this is life now. And I don't like it. You know, so they feel empty. Life has no meaning. Grief is deeper. They start to realize, you know, that they have to make some changes that they don't like, you know, have to move on. They withdraw from life. This is when that social withdrawal starts to get pretty bad. You know, they don't want to leave the house. Some of them like start ordering their groceries, you know, to be have the last stage, which is acceptance. And they say, don't think of it as everything's okay at this point, because it's not, you know, it's just that they're realizing I can't run from this anymore. This is a new normal for me. The reality of the loss is a permanent change in their life and who they are as a person. They're starting to learn to live without the deceased. They reorganize their roles. You know, maybe they used to be a wife and now they're single, and that's new for them. Having more good days than bad days. Starting to make new connections and relationships. So they're starting to get their own personal needs met again. So for children and youth, the acceptance stage might look different than those for an adult, but it is beginning to re-engage in their life and starting to, you know, have new experiences and laugh and not feel guilty for laughing and enjoying themselves. So what they've discovered, though, is that grief is not linear. It's not like you go through these stages, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I'm done. Some people bounce all around. They can be better and then they're worse again. They can go back to anger and then they get back to acceptance again. So they're realizing that this is not a straight line. So Alan Wolfelt is another grief theorist. He's also based out in Colorado, and he's written many, many books. You can find those on Amazon and his website about grief. And he discusses a stage of grief that's a little bit different from Kubler-Ross. He believes that the first stage is acknowledging the reality of the death. So that's similar to denial because the person is in shock, but he believes that the first stage you need to do is acknowledge that you've had a big loss, to express that. And then to embrace the pain. So he's the one that said you have to feel it to heal it. So he believes that in order to get better, people have to go through the painful feelings first. You can't just jump right to I feel better, because he says that's really delayed grief. He said, it's going to come back and bite you later. So you better just go ahead and experience it. So not everybody is going to be able to do that. When you're looking at a child who is too young to really understand the permanency of grief, they're not going to be able to go through the pain of the loss at that stage of life. It will come to them later, though. So for some, maybe they lost a significant parent or sibling or something when they were little, and they knew their life was different, and maybe their day-to-day felt different, but they kind of moved through it. When they get to be an adult, then maybe they start to have these grief feelings. Or maybe when they have their own children and they realize, like, wow, what if my child lost their sibling? And they start to identify with, this is how old I was whenever my sister died, So it can come up later for people. Remembering the person who died, that's part of that life review, spending time, making a scrapbook, making a memory box, sharing stories with each other, listening to the music and looking at the photos. Remembering the person who died is an important stage of grief. Then developing a new self-identity. So because that person is no longer in the life of the individual, they have a new identity. Maybe they're no longer the youngest of the family. Maybe they're an only child now, or maybe, they are an orphan. So there's a lot of changes that happen with that role change. And so they have to develop a new identity because of that. Who am I going to be now that I am this person? Searching for meaning. Why did this have to happen? What did I have to learn from this? Why did my life go this direction? So really trying to understand what came of that, what good came from this. That's a big question for people. Why did this have to happen for me to be where I am now? And being willing to receive ongoing support. He feels like having support is a huge part of, quote, accepting grief, of healing from grief, is being able to accept support. He feels that nobody can heal from grief as an individual who's isolated. So because of that, he came up with this concept of companioning the bereaved. And that's back to that slide that I talked about, where you need to be present with people. So sometimes someone who's grieving doesn't really want advice. They don't want, magic words that's going to make them feel better. They just want you to be with them and sit with them and let them feel their feelings. So he calls that sacred silence. So sometimes, a friend may call and just say, I'm having a bad time. Can you come over? And they just want you to sit with them. And so he feels like that is very important to grievers, just to know that someone's there. If they need support, that they can call someone and they will be there. It's someone witnessing their pain. So that helps them not feel so isolated, helps them not feel so alone. They might not talk about it, but just having you there is important. And he calls it a soul-based journey. Okay, William Worden. Now, William Worden was another grief theorist, and he believed in tasks and needs of grief. And so his tasks, he made it like an acronym here, and it stands for TEAR. And so T is to accept the reality of the loss. So that's similar to Wolfelt, accepting that it's reality. This is your new reality. This is your new normal. This loss has happened. Um, E stands for experiencing the pain, so again, feel it to heal it. You have to actually feel the pain, feel the sadness, feel, the anger, all of that. Um, A stands for adjust to life without the loved one. For a lot of people, that A stage takes a long time. And I think that's important to help parents and caregivers to understand that sadly in our society, they give people 3 days off from work for bereavement. Give me a break. Nobody is going to feel better in 3 days. You're not going to feel better for weeks and weeks and months and months, and for some people, years. So being able to adjust to life without that loved one looks different for everyone based on the relationship that you had with the person that's gone. So helping someone work through those different stages of adjustment is important. And allowing parents to understand, that it might take your child a very long time to move on from this, and that's okay. Like, let them do it at their own pace, because if you try to hurry someone through grief, it never works. Um, and reorganizing and carrying on with life is the R. So learning to cope with the new normal, whether it be, we talked about a job loss, moving on, getting another source of income. If it's moving away from a town that you had a lot of support from, or moving it out of a relationship that was not healthy, all of that takes time, and then you have to move forward. So that's Worden. Okay, Dr. Ira Byock. Now, he was a medical doctor who did a lot of work with terminal ill patients. And he came up with this philosophy that there are 4 things that need to happen for someone to have a good death. And he calls it the 4 things that matter. And it was 4 phrases. He said, people who are dying need to hear, thank you. Please forgive me. They need to give forgiveness, and they need to say, I love you. So if you have a child who is going to be experiencing a loss that hasn't happened yet, educating the family on the importance of this will really help with the grieving process if this can happen. So if they can say thank you to the person, forgive me for anything that maybe they feel they did wrong, again, with the guilt and the regret that children have, being able to say that, to say that they forgive the person, let that person be able to ask for forgiveness as well, and to say I love you. That's probably one of the things that comes up every grief counseling session is, oh, if I could just say I love you one more time, So if the loss has already happened and the person didn't get to do this, this is where that letter exercise is so helpful, to let the person write a letter to the person who's gone and say these things, thank you so much for taking care of me. Thank you for the wonderful memories we had. Thank you for, being in my life, or whatever. Forgive me for that time I was mean to you, or I said this thing, or I didn't spend time with you, or, whatever it is they feel they need forgiveness for, to say that they forgive the person and to say, I love you. So, some people do it as a letter. Some people share it out loud as a family. Some people, I will say, hey, just go in a quiet room by yourself and just talk to the space, and some people believe the person can hear, so I encourage them to express these things. Some people do it as an empty chair technique, where they can pretend the person's sitting there and say it. I will say this is a very emotional exercise for people. I tried to do it in a support group one time. I wouldn't recommend doing that again because everybody was just sobbing. It was really difficult for people. So this is really a private individual thing for people to do. But it is very therapeutic, and I think it helps people to have some closure on things that are bothering them, that they didn't get a chance to resolve, especially if there was some issues of in reconciliation. So I do recommend his book, The Four Things That Matter Most. Okay, the secondary grief of helping professionals. So obviously you are in the helping profession because you are caring individuals, you have a lot of empathy for people. And because of that, you can take on people's grief feelings. For one, you can take on their feelings, you can identify with them and empathize with them, but also sometimes this can trigger grief in yourself for your own previous losses. So that's why I think it's so important for us to be aware of how many losses we've had, and and in that timeline, looking at how did I cope with each one of these losses. Sometimes you can look at that and say, wow, I've done pretty well because I had a lot of traumatic things happen in my life and I keep on moving and I'm doing well. Other times you can look back and go, oh, you know what? I never dealt with this thing back here. And I probably need to deal with that. So sometimes it's a matter of realizing that you need to see a professional to help you. But the secondary grief of helping professionals is natural. So being emotionally attached to clients and families happens, of course. You work with a family or a child or a youth for a long period of time, or even for a short period of time. For some of you, you can get attached. So when they hurt, you hurt, that's natural. Be self-aware though when you're over identifying with a family's pain. Like after you've spent time with them, if you go home and you're crying or you're feeling upset the rest of the night or you feel exhausted, that's your clue. I am taking on some secondary grief right now. I realize it, I recognize it. What am I going to do with it? Because I think it can be very dangerous to take on secondary grief all the time and never do anything with it to decompress, because it will lead to burnout for you. So being aware when you're over identifying with it. Recognize when your boundaries have been blurred. Here's some of the signs of that. If you find that while the person is sharing or while the family is going through it, that you have several occasions where you want to jump in and say, this happened to me, this is what I did, or I remember that, and this is how our family handled it, your boundaries are getting blurred, because you're having countertransference in those moments, because it's reminding you of something that happened in your life and you're projecting it back to them. So being aware of when that happens, have a plan in place. You want to make sure you have somebody to talk to, whether it be a supervisor at work, a coworker, a colleague, or your own therapist. Hey, I'm getting triggered by this family, that's experiencing a loss very similar to one that I had when I was a kid. So do not begin sharing your experiences with the child or the family. Again, for one, grievers don't want to hear it. They're going to be polite and not tell you that, but that is absolutely the truth. They don't want to hear about your experiences. They've got enough to worry about of their own. They don't need to take on your experience, but also how you managed it might not be their value, So if you say, oh, you need to go you spend time with grandma because you're going to regret it, that's projecting onto them something that may not be their experience. So just make sure that, we all have our own values, morals, spiritual beliefs and everything, but as a professional, we need to keep that to ourselves and just listen and reflect back what the person is experiencing. That's very important. Practice self-care before and after work. So if you know you're going to be working with a family that has a lot of emotional things going on, start your day off right, whether that be, getting yourself a coffee or a tea and just having a quiet moment to prepare. There's lots of great inspirational readings to do. You can, meditate, whatever you need to do in the mornings. And same thing after work. Have a way to decompress, whether that be, something you enjoy doing just to get rid of stress, but also journaling or whatever you need to do to kind of release some of those emotions that you're feeling. Again, talk with a supervisor, colleague. A lot of organizations have employee assistance programs, and we don't utilize them, which is sad because it's free and it's there for a reason. And it is confidential. It's by law, it has to be confidential. So talk to your EAP counselor if you need to. Most of them, I think, have 5 or 6 free sessions of counseling that you can use them for. So it's a good idea to do that or to have your own therapist. Become comfortable with your own views and experiences with grief and loss. So again, it can't hurt to spend some time thinking through this when you know you're going to be working with a family that's experiencing grief and loss, to spend some time processing your own, whether it be, reading some of these resources that we've talked about or just doing your own research. There's a lot of things out there, self-help books and, workbooks and things that you can use for grief. But it's just a good idea to be aware, if you yourself are experiencing anticipatory grief because you have someone in your life who is ill, it's a good idea to have a professional that's helping you with that while you're in the process of working with these other families, because it will inadvertently give you, a drainage of emotion and fatigue, whether you even realize it or not. So tips for self-care for the professional. So first of all, proper rest. I know most of us are terrible at that, but you really need 7 to 8 hours of sleep at night, at least 6, according to my doctor. So you want to make sure you're getting proper rest in order to, give your body a chance to recharge for the next day. Good nutrition, that, like we always know, you should plan ahead, plan your meals, take snacks that are healthy. When you're running on empty and you're running through and you're grabbing, fast food, or you're totally not even eating during the day, that is a recipe for emotional deterioration. So make sure that you're eating well. Exercise, of course, if you can work in a nice walk during your lunch break, or walking in the morning, or yoga, or whatever it is that you like to do for exercise, try to incorporate that in your life. Strive for balance, a good work-life balance. As helping professionals, we're terrible at that, but you really have to consciously make a decision, like, I am going to be done with my workday at 5. I'm not going to ruminate on this stuff all the way until 8 o'clock at night. It's not good for me, so make sure you have a nice balance there. Seek out opportunities for fun. Whenever you go to conferences, sometimes, they go around the table and say, hey, what are your hobbies? What do you like to do for fun? And inevitably, when you've got a whole circle of helping professionals around a table, like 2 or 3 people have an answer, and the rest of us are like, what do I do for fun? I don't know. I work. What do I do? So have an answer, have an opportunity for fun. Make sure that you incorporate that into your life. Laugh often. There's so many opportunities for videos and funny things out there nowadays, even if, like, I know some of my coworkers and I will send each other memes or, silly things throughout the day just to laugh and be goofy, because you need that way to decompress, every day. And the other thing you could do is try gratitude journaling. So, the old thing that grandma used to say, count your blessings, there's something to that. So at the end of each day, if you have a notebook that you could just write down, these are the things that I'm thankful for today that happened. I'm thankful to be alive. I'm glad that, I have my family, or whatever. I, have function. I can walk. I can use my arms. I can see. I can breathe. Anything that you're thankful for. To write that down. That's a great way to end your day, to help you focus on something positive. Because if you don't do these things when you go to bed, you're going to be thinking about work, you're going to be processing all of those emotions, and it's going to impact the type of rest that you get. You can have dreams and nightmares and just not a restful sleep if you don't do these things. So make self-care a priority. I know you probably heard that all through school. There's a reason. It's important for you to be able to stay in this profession. So these are the references for some of the resources that I talked about today. Again, Ira Byock has many books out, but the four things that matter most is the one that talks about those phrases. Kubler-Ross has several books too on death and dying. There's also a new book out, co-written by her and another grief counselor named David Kessler called On Grief and Grieving, and that's helpful. Companioning the Bereaved, that's one of Wolfout's books. Again, he's got about 60 books on Amazon. So helping teens cope with death, again, definitely visit the Dougy Center website. There's all kinds of great resources there. Also, www.grief.com has great things as well. So thank you very much. That was everything that I had to share. I'm sorry we weren't able to talk more today. I would love to have your feedback, but please do give some great feedback in the evaluations so that we can improve even more in the future.